So, good morning from Vietnam. I'd like to share with you how we are accelerating growth in Vietnam through building our foundations today for today and today for tomorrow. But first, Vietnam today. Vietnam has a population of 91 million people. It's the 14th biggest country in the world in terms of population. 1.5 million babies are born every year. 24 million households with a very young median age of the population at 29. And another interesting thing about Vietnam is there are 31 million motorbikes. Each and every household has got a motorbike. The motorbike is an extension of the Vietnamese body, and they practically do many things with the motorbike. In terms of GDP per cap, it's $2,200 today. It was $500 10 years ago. And tomorrow, with the ambition 2030 by the Vietnamese government, they intend to make Vietnam a middle-income country with at least about $8,000 GDP per cap. The GDP remains very small at 186 billion, and it's primarily still an agri-based country. Nestle has helped Vietnam, and I'll show later in the presentation how we've made Vietnam the second biggest coffee exporter in the world. In terms of population distribution, 68% of the population in Vietnam lives in the rural areas. Moving on to Nestle in Vietnam. Just now Wang Ling mentioned many of the companies where Nestle operate. We are more than 100 years old. In Vietnam, we are 21 years old. With the unification of Vietnam in 1975, with the end of the Vietnam War, most of the multinationals exited, and Nestle came back into Vietnam post what we call in Vietnam the Doi Moi era. So since 1995, we have been steadily and surely investing our capacities and our capabilities in Vietnam. And more importantly, we are accelerating these investments. So as we speak, we've got a new factory coming on board. This is our 6th factory, and a new DC, which we hope to open next year. Our portfolio remains very narrow. We do not have the full range of the entire Nestle portfolio in Vietnam. Milo is our single biggest brand, followed by Nescafe and Maggi. In the others, there's a significant water business, and there's another big brand called Nan. Now, how are we doing? In 2014, we grew 12.4%. In 2015, we moved up a few notches to 15.4%. And this quarter, we grew steadily again at 21.4%. And how is this growth coming and where is this growth coming from? And I'd like to share on the foundations that we have been building, namely by building our brands by knowing our consumers deeper. I'd like to share a short video on our #1 brand, on the work we do behind Milo.
Anh em ta cùng nhau tiến bước đi qua trên cùng những chặng đường, bên nhau ta làm nên chiến thắng, chúng ta xích lại gần và ta khoe khoắn hơn, năng động hơn, mỗi ngày tự tin hơn, cùng nhau ta tiến lên, đừng ngại ngần, vững vàng cùng Milo. Yeah yeah, Milo thêm năng lượng, Milo thêm kiên cường, những thử thách trên đường dài vẫn không hề ngại. Milo thêm năng lượng, Milo thêm kiên cường, cùng nắm lấy cơ hội này tiến lên mỗi ngày. Milo, here we go, Milo, Milo, let's go. 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 Milo thêm năng lượng, Milo thêm kiên cường, những thử thách trên đường dài vẫn không hề ngại. Milo thêm năng lượng, Milo thêm kiên cường, cùng nắm lấy cơ hội này tiến lên mỗi ngày. Milo thêm năng lượng, Milo thêm kiên cường, những thử thách trên đường dài vẫn không hề ngại. Milo thêm năng lượng, Milo thêm kiên cường, cùng nắm lấy cơ hội này tiến lên mỗi ngày. Milo, here we go, Milo, Milo, let's go.
We kind of succeeded in cracking the consumer code for Milo. The Milo brand has been growing steadily. We've got a product which is very popularly positioned. One of these bricks actually costs 30 cents US, so for $1 you get almost 4 packs. And year on year, we've been averaging more than 20% growth. We've got a winning product which is tailor-made to Vietnamese tastes and consistently scoring on 60-40 and 60-40 plus, which is the NHW benefit. It's the single biggest SKU in Vietnam in terms of their flavored, nutritious beverage with about 45% market share. All the activities that you saw in the video just now has been in collaboration with Vietnamese sports bodies like the Football Association and the government of Vietnam. And today, Vietnam is the biggest Milo RTD market in the Nestle world. Moving on to another pillar of Nestlé Vietnam is Nescafé. But before that, coffee is not new to Vietnam. Being a former French colony, the French introduced coffee more than 150 years ago in Vietnam. Vietnam is a very long country. It's a shape of an S, and from shore to Siny Shore, from the Gulf of Siam to the Gulf of Tonkin, it's about 2,000 kilometers. And the spread of that 2,000 kilometers shows varied weather conditions and different types of way of consuming coffee. In the north, coffee is drunk primarily in the winter, and it's got relatively lower consumption. In the south, where bulk of the coffee is being drunk, it's drunk cold, or rather iced coffee. And in Vietnam, it's all driven through 3-in-1 and 2-in-1 Nescafes. So again, cracking the consumer code. As I mentioned earlier, bulk of the coffee in Vietnam, and to be precise, 80% of coffee in Vietnam is drunk ice. You might have heard ice blended. In Vietnam, is ice melted. The consumer prepares the coffee hot, using hot water, and that hot coffee is poured over a mug of ice. So the first sip of coffee and the last sip of coffee is different, because the Vietnamese consumer takes more than 20 minutes to drink a cup of coffee, or rather a mug of coffee. Coffee is not the first cup in the morning. It's drunk later in the afternoon. So based on all of these insights on how Vietnamese drink coffee, we had a challenge to crack the product that delivers the first sip and the last sip with body and aroma, liking it to close as possible to the Vietnamese soluble experience. So we managed to crack the code by adding soya at the point of extraction of coffee. So this Café Viet, Nescafé Café Viet, is a global brand and locally delivered, inspired by what we saw the consumers in Vietnam want. Now I'd like to take you through a small culinary journey, our third biggest brand, and I'd like to share a little bit about the Vietnamese cuisine. Essentially, there's two parts of the Vietnamese cuisine: what happens in the kitchen and what happens on the table. There are 4 methods of preparation in the Vietnamese kitchen: soups, stir-frying, fry, and braised. And for each and every one of this method of preparation, we spent a lot of time with the consumers figuring out which category opportunity that we can assign to each one of these methods. So for soups, there's a bouillon opportunity. For stir-frying, there's an oyster sauce opportunity. And for braised, there's a soya sauce opportunity. And then on the table, there's always dipping sauces, fish sauce and soya sauce. So again, through extensive consumer home visits, we have managed to now produce locally designed, locally competitive with 60/40 across this entire epicure of Vietnam. So we've got Maggi mushroom granular bouillon to fit into soups. We've got Maggi oyster sauce to fit into stir-frying. And we've got soy sauce that makes a good companion for the braised way of cooking. And on the table, we've also got Maggi soy sauce. So for each and every one of these categories that we participate, Maggi is number one. We're number one in vegetarian bouillon, we're number one in oyster sauce, and we're number one in premium soya sauce. Again, in all 3 brands, we can always say the Vietnamese consumer is different, but we spent a lot of time understanding our consumer more deeply by spending lots and lots of time to figure out what their real needs are. Moving on, we've also been building foundations in our sales and distribution. There are 400,000 outlets in Vietnam. Nestlé Vietnam covers directly 143,000 outlets today. These are direct coverage and not numeric distribution. We have a dense distributor network of 113 distributors. We cover 22,000 outlets a day with a 1,000-person disciplined sales force. And now here again, I'd like to share something else. Innovation doesn't exactly come on products alone or business models. It's also the way we work. The way we work in Vietnam in sales is something called the sales factory. A normal factory produces products based on a bill of materials, which has got raw materials, packaging, energy, and conversion. And each line has got efficiencies. If you take the same concepts, and which is NCE inspired, and translate it into the sales factory produces a call. Calls is when an outlet is visited by a salesman. The bill of material in sales is the number of outlets, channels, and the various kind of turnover that we can get from each of the outlet. In production, we have line efficiency. Here we have distributor efficiency. We have daily operations review, weekly operations review, monthly operations review at distributor level, which allows us to see what exactly goes on and having greater transparency in our sales operations. And more importantly, solving problems at the lowest level possible. So with this movement in sales, we've managed to now have a direct access to more than 140,000 outlets where we can implement our picture of success in terms of merchandising and distribution. Another opportunity, which we are also again building foundations for, is the geographical expansion opportunity in Vietnam. Vietnam's population distribution is 32% urban, of which the 32% represents 89 cities. The bulk of the Vietnamese population, which is about 68%, live in the rural heartlands. However, for Nestle, it's the other way around, for Nestlé Vietnam at least. 30% of our turnover is from the rural areas and 70% urban. So we have also embarked on another program, how we start moving from the tier 1 cities to tier 2 cities to tier 3 cities, and eventually we'd like to reach to all of these consumers and shoppers by our Go Rural program, which again ensures a relatively healthy pipeline of growth in the future.
Lắng đọng trong mỗi ly Nescafe là một tình yêu sâu sắc dành cho hạt cà phê Việt Nam. Vì tình yêu đó, Nescafe luôn sát cánh cùng người nông dân, từ cung cấp cây giống, hỗ trợ kỹ thuật canh tác cho tới tận khi thu hái để cho ra đời những hạt cà phê chất lượng nhất. Vì tình yêu đó, Nescafe luôn tỉ mỉ trong từng khâu sản xuất, chế biến, rang xay cho những ly cà phê với hương vị không thể nào quên. Hãy cảm nhận từng tách Nescafe đậm đà đầy cảm xúc. Nescafe yêu lắm hạt cà phê.
Nestle, good food, good life.
Apart from building our foundations in terms of production capacity and sales and marketing commercial capability, the other thing we've also been successful in is creating shared value with our stakeholders in Vietnam. As I mentioned just now, Vietnam is the second biggest exporter of coffee in the world, the biggest Robusta coffee producer and exporter in the world. And Nestle Vietnam had a small role to play in that. Today in Vietnam, Nestle is the biggest buyer of coffee, the biggest buyer of 4C's coffee. 4C coffee is coffee, the common code for the coffee community, which is again ensuring sustainable way of producing coffee. We work closely with 20,000 farmers, and we have conducted over the last 5 years 18,000 lessons with farmers where we share the best agricultural practices in ensuring through demo plots the farmers use less water, less fertilizer, and give more yield. Believe it or not, some of the farmers are using way too much water and way too much fertilizer and actually spending a lot more money than required. Also in this process, we have distributed 11 million plantlets which are high yielding. So all of this is our way of ensuring that we also build foundations with our relevant stakeholders as a local multinational. Today, Nestle Vietnam sits as the co-chair with the Minister of Agriculture in the Public-Private Partnership for Agriculture. We are sharing to more and more farmers how to plant coffee the right way or the best way, using best practices. I like to summarize by giving 4 takeaways which has helped us accelerate growth in Vietnam today and will also ensure we continue this growth path in the near future. The first part was on consumer insight. Milo, Nescafe, and Maggi were all driven through local consumer insights in both of product deployment and consumer communication. Second, our commercial capacity and capability is also being built that we can also reach further and further into parts of Vietnam which remains a white spot for us, especially with the Go Rural program, which will give us more distribution expansion in the near future. Last but not least, we also wanted to continue to win in Vietnam as a local multinational, participating and partnering with all our stakeholders, and in particular the government of Vietnam, as we progress forward. With that, thank you very much, and I'll hand over to Danesh to take over.